Thank you very much, Adam and the team at MoDev. I'm going to introduce our lead interviewer for this conversation at the Global Voice Summit 2021, and that's Mr. Dave Statman. And Dave is a Emmy-winning creative director and producer in advertising, content development, and turning insights into stories that define culture, reward audiences, and inspire action. Dave spent 10 years at Time Warner Global Media Group, where as VP in creative development, he led a team that secured multi-billion-dollar media commitments from partners including Amex, Anheuser-Busch, Bank of America, GM, and Unilever, producing award-winning multi-platform content that leveraged Time Warner's portfolio. Currently, Dave is creative strategist and co-founder of Nerve Creative, helping position and launch widely ambitious startups in mixed reality media, predictive tech, blockchain, and fintech. Dave's leading the charge on a $50 million capital campaign to support the Museum of the City of New York's centennial and resurrect the city in that process. And also, Dave, by the way, has, because I know him, Dave has had stints speech writing for Joe Biden, helping reposition CBS, scripting upfronts for NBC Universal, and developing a slate of original content and commissioned content, sparking social justice initiatives. Dave Statman, glad to have you here today. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. You know, for those of you who thought the Friends reunion was actually on HBO Max, it's actually right here. Lee and I go way back decades. And just to tell you a little about Lee, he began his career in theater on the streets of New York City in front of the Metropolitan Museum as an art as a mime. Went on to train in Paris before taking up roles with Cirque du Soleil overseas as the lead clown on one of their biggest shows, Saltimbanco. Ross is also a produced screenwriter, with his first movie starring Maria Bello and Rufus Sewell heading straight to the Sundance in 2008. And since then, he's turned his attention towards human design, and specifically conversational voice design. His unique background in the story, emotional interaction without words, have led to specific ideas in the voice-first community and some fundamental tenets around conversational voice design. I'd like to welcome Lee Ross to this conversation, and we'd like to thank MoDev and the Global Voice Summit for having us.
Thank you, MoDev, and great to make this happen right here for coming up in June. Dave, your background is insanely diverse, and we've had over the years many conversations about where things are going. We have watched things evolve in both media, infotainment, and so many areas of the entertainment and tech industries, and financial as well. Where would you like to begin with voice? Because this summit is all about voice and artificial intelligence and where voice is going.
So my question is, how do you define voice in terms of the utility function of rewarding an audience?
I think that the reward is having the interaction that works in and of itself. When we have successful voice interactions, not just chatbots, but actual complete experiences that are completely audio-based and auditory, that's the reward. I feel that we're still a long ways away from some of the goals that the voice-first community has created as it accelerates into being the next space to be in. And I think a lot of listeners on this summit are going to possibly agree that voice is the next big frontier when we look at the internet and where things have gone.
Where do you see the strengths of voice versus video or other tactile media?
Well, I think that first of all, it's the first thing we learn usually for most people, unless you're born deaf. um, you're going to be articulating, and it is definitely the first way we learn mostly to communicate, aside from physically pointing and gesture. And so with voice, I think that it is often the simplest thing that makes it the most difficult to program and make the architecture happen within the abilities that Alexa and Google Assistant and all the different platforms currently are out there. They're very simplistic and not able to necessarily negotiate the more complex things that many of the voice audience already kind of have a handle on. I don't know if I answered your question though.
Well, we were talking about the strength of voice. You talked about, that we're informed and we're defined by it from early days, in terms of whoops. In terms of early days, like, whether it's we're being told bedtime stories or lullabies or all those sorts of things. Voice is something that we find really connects us, and it's very there's a real power there. So we were talking a little bit about that. You talked about the complexity of it. I mean, today I was looking to go meet a friend at a restaurant, Bubby's, right? And I asked Google, and it came up with a whole bunch of listings for puppies. And it's like, obviously, as you say, it's early days. Where do you see the real future of voice? I mean, from your perspective, not from where the industry is going, but from the intersections that you personally, as a creator, would see it going.
Thanks. This gets into, and I think we've touched on this a couple of times, that the where it's going is not is being propelled by industry and transactional stuff, whether the different sectors such as the banking and financial sector, that voice is getting developed just for that. Then you have health and medical, and where solutions on combined with your bracelet or wearable, or in the automotive sector, where it's all about the voice in the car and what system you're working with. We still have, as we all know, where you only get 5 choices, more or less. It's like the big phone carriers that we only have Alexa, Google. There are smaller players like Bixby and Cortana, which are still very huge, but all are still separate. There is no one voice system that we all interact with. You must choose a domain to be in, and then that's monetized to try and get you to transact. So when I think of where voice is going, we still have a long way to go to just get to what we primarily see in TV shows and movies right now, which is a type of programming, but we don't interact really on a certain fundamental, simple level with our. You're asking about a restaurant, and it tells you about puppies, whereas I think that a lot of the time, what is missing in the voice sector, which is part of this conversation I wanted to have, was why aren't we designing for a more simple human experience? Even though we need these transactions, what time is the movie? Buy me my tickets, make it all transparent, fluid, one voice command, and I have my tickets waiting for me at the cinema. But really, we don't deal with, on an emotional level. Voice is not advanced enough with its algorithms to know how you feel with a word, like infer. So I think that we have such a long way to go with designing voice for humans, for being human, and what we need as human beings on a much more basic level, which has been touched upon with chatbots in the health space. So apps like Hear Me or Life, which interact on a mental health level to just interact with you as, how are you feeling? What made you feel that way? Asking you questions and prompts, but it's not yet in a voice space that really is first and foremost up front, where you talk to it like we see in the movies or, on a TV show? Not yet.
I mean, one of the things is like, Elon Musk talks about the fact that if they really wanted to do autonomous driving, they'd basically have to rip up all the roads, right? We'd have to, the car would force us to adapt to the way it is optimized versus the other way around. And one of the things that I find is like when I'm saying, hey, Google, timer off or whatever it is like I have to figure out what the commands are that it understands versus it understanding what I'm saying. But let's get back to the way you're sort of imagining the future, where really an optimal voice, relationship exists. Paint a little bit of the picture of that.
Sure. So, as you introduced me, I came from a very, I'm going to say to our audience, whoever's listening right now, I'm not a programmer. I'm not I'm not in the space of voice as far as how people approach it in the industry to get certified and get their certificates. I have some UX background, but I really came from a very different space, which had to do with getting people to interact in front of an audience and create an operating system that was very simple, based around vocal effects. And that led to many ideas about why don't we have such a simple, interface that takes us away from the phone, takes us away from the display. And because we are a eyesight first, eyesight based humanity, we are not a hearing based. We're not operating with just a hearing based system for most of your day. Sure, Apple and Google Glass want to put another layer on in front of us, and at some point in the very near future, half of the population is going to walk around with a display that they're looking at half of the time. And I don't think we need another layer. We're not designing and creating to make it more compounded and more difficult to speak and I mean, where is the simplicity of being a human in the moment? Let's get back to really what do humans need to be content in the real world, in the three-dimensional world, while you're driving or doing whatever, and not having to interact with a screen all the time or most of the time, which is leading to health problems with our spine and other issues. It's compounded all the time. I just am wondering, how long will it be before we have a interface that really forces us to rethink how much tech do we really need in our everyday lives? How much screen time do we all really need that allows us to, and through voice primarily, where do we get back to being human?
So to that point, one of the most powerful things out there is music, right? You can change the whole way you feel about things based on the music you're listening to or the music that surrounds you. And one of the interesting things is music and audio are one of the few things you can do other things at the same time. Now, there really is no concurrency, like, people talk about multitasking, but really most multitasking is taking your eye off one thing and putting it on another. But with audio, you're actually able to do more than one thing at a time. It's a very intriguing and novel, and I think it's a signature and powerful thing. Again, a very powerful thing. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, it'd be lovely to be able to say to your, whichever OS, operating system for voice that you're on, it would be lovely to, especially if it was, I don't use Google Assistant. I'm primarily very frustrated with Siri because I have for a long time now been in the Apple ecosystem, and yet Siri lags greatly behind Alexa and Google. But with music in particular, because I believe Spotify is about to have their own voice-driven interface arrive for their platform, is to be able to just say, select my ambient background soundtrack for my life today, I'm in a good mood. Alexa, give me my life soundtrack that is, Brian Eno-ish, or somehow being able to have it complement and accelerate how you feel. And we're still have a long way to go with that, let alone being able to do other things while you're listening to some kind of background music or soundtrack for your life that day. There's such a huge push right now for AR and VR, and I know you're working on projects that have to do with VR, and I'm very interested in operating systems that are creative for our voice. So when you're driving down the highway for 3 hours, you can interact with a creative voice suite that would help you develop a novel or ask you questions and work with you on characters, and not just where you have to write it down or tap on a screen or any of that. And so voice dictation and the issues of recognizing speech when there's accents are all big problems in the voice community. Especially if you have a weird accent from the Caribbean or somewhere.
I hear what you're talking about with a sort of a co-pilot OS type of thing. And is there anyone out there that's doing it well at this point? You've done a real good survey of the landscape.
What I've found is that there aren't very many creative voice apps that actually punctuate a process to get you accelerated in whatever idea you're working on. Right now, even if let's just take, for example, the screenwriting, filmmaking and screenwriting, you can't dictate a screenplay yet to any operating system that intuitively puts it together in the format that would allow you to then just go send it to so-and-so because you dictated that scene versus trying to sit there and write it because you were busy or you want to say it, you want to speak it. It's so intuitive to speak something in a different way than the channels that we process to go through writing.
Yeah. Okay, so you've had a lot of ideas and you've tried to launch a lot of ideas in this sort of connected space, bringing people together. Tell us a little bit about All One Thing. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of that and the vision of that. I know it was, in a certain sense, a lot of voice-based, but tell us about the vision.
I think we're going back to the very first big idea. I guess I tried to get funding for at a time where the internet was still very slow moving, pre YouTube, pre Facebook, but we didn't even have cameras that were wearable or anything. GoPro, all of that was so. All One Thing at the time, was about a type of wearable, portable, self-reporting system. Back when cameras were much bigger, and going back 20 years, but it was a predecessor to some of my ideas right now about why aren't we designing more for headsets and for through your watch, so you don't even have to carry a brick, a phone. Why are we still carrying these big bricks with screens? Why can we leave the screen at home? And so All One Thing was really about a way to hear one another that showed up differently as we evolved with our tech. With YouTube doesn't have, it's part of the Googleplex and Alphabet, and there are, unfortunately, big tech have other agendas inside their companies. So and they get to be so big that they kind of lose their initial intent of whatever. Very few companies have an intention to really stay true to whatever it was that mission statement or purpose, such as really unbiased reporting is very hard to find. So, how do we, independent reporting, and all one thing was going to be a way to hear one another directly through our own information reported by ourselves long ago. And so today I'm still perplexed that we don't have some kind of useful voice-driven interface the way when we get on Roku or we get on any of our home devices to figure out which streaming service we want. We look at all those boxes and you have to choose, well, is it Vudu? Is it Tubi? Why can't we have that in voice where we get to select which platform? I'll choose the Moth, and I would like to hear some stories that are voice-driven, personal stories that have a human emotional component, and they are delivered to me through a voice interface only. And I don't know why, for example, the Moth as a company is not doing that in the voice space.
So one of the things I found really that was the most sticky for me about All One Thing was the idea that most people have no interest in esophageal cancer until they get it or they have someone who's got it. And then suddenly that's their focus. Whatever it is, they are hyper focused on that thing. And the idea that I understood, one of the aspects of All One Thing, was to connect you to someone who had a similar experience. Either they had it personally or they were moved by it. And so you really were establishing sort of like almost like an Airbnb model of aggregating human experiences so that people could tap into these networks of highly personal. Almost it was sort of like, if I'm not reading it too far off, it's like OnlyFans or Cameo, where you really are disintermediating a lot of the big broadcasters and the gatekeepers, and you're having this direct connection with other human beings about human experiences through audio.
And in a way, Clubhouse is doing somewhat this, little groups or pods of people, mostly listening to experts, or but yet it doesn't quite lead anywhere with Clubhouse. But with All One Thing, yeah, the original intention was that, as you just said, until you were personally affected by something, either health or whatever it might be, that then you have a real interest in pursuing it, because it directly relates to your life. And there are lots of different networks out there, but it doesn't interrelate everything. It doesn't interrelate things in a way where you get a bigger picture of how you fit inside that entire universe that you're exploring. And that was what All One Thing was about, to give you a perspective sharing ecosystem that made sense. It was sense making for you as you were involved with it.
Okay, so we've known each other a long time. You've had a number of big ideas. That was certainly one of them. Can you share another one of the ideas? Can you give us any sort of look at the garage? What's going on in the garage?
Going on in the garage. I think that the difficult thing right now is that, and because I pivoted into the voice space and I'm really new to it. So everybody listening, thank you for bearing with me. I don't know all of the technical stuff, but I do know on an emotional and simple entertainment level, what do we really need? The most basic apps that are very highly successful are usually very simple. And until we make some breakthrough, I'm still waiting for this, kind of singular breakthrough with voice. And maybe it's going to be somehow woven into our clothing, and you're going to wear an interface that is beyond any kind of device that we are always being tracked, and all of our analytics are being consumed by this gigantic machine that wants to break apart what it is you do and how you ingest become information. But in the garage right now, I'm just really wanting to put a team together. I would love to be able to have the opportunity to sit down with a group of developers, a group of designers and coders, and go, let's rethink voice the way other companies are rethinking, whatever, retail or music, or, I think voice is still being funneled through very specific transactional agendas, and we've yet to break through. But maybe the next big breakthrough is going to be with AR and wearing glasses all the time, and everybody's going to have a set.
Okay, so we all hear voices in our head, right? And we have these voice assistants. Tell me, is there any dystopian universe where our assistants sort of like flip the switch and flip the proposition and we become their assistants? You worried about that in the voice space?
I've contemplated a lot, because voice is very tied to AI, and yet we have different AIs that are out there doing things all the time. But as many futurists have noted, we've yet to have the one singularity that delivers a completely I am awake, I am individually awake consciousness on the internet, or at least we don't know about it yet, regardless of DeepMind and all the other quantum computers, the 5 to 8 of them that are out there in the world, and owned by enormous companies, not just IBM and the original, supercomputers. But yeah, I do. It makes me think of the movie Primer, and which had to do with time travel. But in this small independent film, what we realize at the end is that a future version of his own self is secretly whispering in his headset what's happening before it happens, what to do. And so, I love the idea as a storyteller that maybe we're going to have a companion that whispers in our ear and is one step ahead of us on a quantum level, and maybe it tells us little hints of what might be coming up, or which way to go to have serendipity in your life happen, or, as I've said, to meet the love of your life, some quantum computer helps you kind of navigate Comic-Con, and you meet that one woman dressed as, you can't even tell who it is. Who knows where we're going to go as this all evolves.
So two last questions. One of them is, it's like, so we've listened a lot to you, and I'm sure people here are listening to a lot of other people. What are you listening to these days?
Yeah. In terms of music, I'll speak there first. I recently watched a movie, a Hugh Grant movie, and of course the credits roll and they have some music playing along, and I discovered this band that's from my old neighborhood where I grew up in New York, called Lawrence, and they're pretty fresh. I was really surprised to discover this band that a brother and sister duo with a full band. And I was just, for being old school, I was thrilled to see these young kids making a kind of music that was soul, and that was a big discovery. So I've been kind of playing a lot of this band, and then on a more personal level, I've actually, you listen to a lot more stuff than I do. I tend to try to limit the noise, so to speak, because we're bombarded as a society so much by so many outside influences. And what is your personal bandwidth as a human? Because we need to have quiet time too, or kids today don't know how to have quiet, meaningful nature, regular life without all the tech. That's really hard. So I don't listen to a lot of too many podcasts. I'm trying to write my next script, which has to do with reverse aging, and vaccines and other weird stuff. But I really have enjoyed this group Lawrence of late.
All right. So any last words?
It's been great I really appreciate you coming out to interact with the Global Summit community, and hopefully there'll be some interesting feedback on the topics we covered.
All right.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Dave.
It's a pleasure.
Before you go,
yes.
you're developing a podcast that you're going to be launching soon. Is that right?
Yes, we're launching I'm actually, you know what? I got tired of being they say don't hate people, don't wait on people. And I decided that there were so many ideas that I wanted to sort of put out there in the universe based on my old days doing stand-up comedy. And I actually found that the URL for was available, and it's called The Most Listened To Podcast.
the most listened
Available
to
at the most listened to podcast.com.
dot
Coming
com.
soon. Thank you so much for the promotion.
Yeah, yeah. Again, the MoDev team, Adam and Taylor and everybody, thank you so much, Lindsay, and hopefully we'll get to attend the summit live and in person when it comes back directly in the world, not just virtually. So thank you, everyone at MoDev.